Brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that supports life and family. 5% of your monthly plan price goes to your favorite charity. Buy the way you believe at CharityMobile.com and use promo code TRADITION.
The church was liberated from the evil influence of former Cardinal Ted McCarrick this past Thursday. His influence will certainly remain for quite some time, probably decades, as the men he put into the priesthood are very much now among the ranks of bishops and cardinals. But the reports on his passing have been restrained for the most part. Even American Magazine and the National Catholic Reporter had been fairly restrained in how they covered his death, though they did make sure to repeat the lies of the so-called McCarrick Report. And if you don't know what the McCarrick Report was, go back in time to 2018. In the summer of 2018, Archbishop Vigano set fire essentially to the Catholic side of the internet by reporting on, well, his now famous testimony, his 10-page letter that he wrote to the public telling all, exposing Pope Francis's involvement in hiding Ted McCarrick's evil deeds. This was happening at the time that the lid was being blown off of Ted McCarrick and his evil. He's preying on seminarians. He is doing things to, kids who are probably about right to start looking for getting their driver's license, to give you an idea what his tastes were, as well as his political involvement. He was chums with politicians on both sides of the political aisle. And Vigano released a letter, having been at the time, the recently exiled nuncio to the United States. And he told all about Francis hiding these deeds and all these things. The so-called McCarrick Report would come about a year later, and it would place the blame for Ted McCarrick at the feet of John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Archbishop Vigano. It painted Pope Francis in as rosy a light as they could, making it sound like he was the great solver of the evil men in the priesthood problem, when that's far from the truth. He has himself a track record of having hid numerous men in the priesthood, bishops and priests, usually in Rome, or when he was in Argentina in his chancery, to shield them from the legal consequences of their actions. Look how he handled the Rupnik case as an example of that. But the secular media also reported on McCarrick's passing, and they did something kind of subtle in all of this. They used the opportunity to elevate the new Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Robert McElroy, as an authority on the safety of minors and women in the Catholic Church. By the way, for those who might be asking, yes, I have a cold. I woke up with a cold this morning. Prayers appreciated, but it's just a cold. I'll be fine. The problem is here that McElroy is himself accused of having hid men like McCarrick in the priesthood in his previous assignments as bishop. They elevated Robert McElroy to this great hero of this issue, and it's so laughable on its face that no one should take what they're doing seriously. McElroy, though, to be clear, is not accused of having done these evil deeds himself. He is, however, accused of having hid men away who did those things. He's essentially accused of being an American Bergoglio, and McElroy is known to have been an ally or even friend of Cardinal Ted McCarrick. So we go to this posting on X from Rachel Mastrogiacomo, who, if you remember my reporting on her when she confronted Cardinal McElroy at his installation mass in Washington, D.C., she is the young woman who some years ago had been prepared, we'll say, carefully over months or even longer than that by a seminarian who was later ordained a priest, who then did horrible things to her of a sinful nature. It's right out of the pages of Windswept House, or pretty close to it, if you're familiar with what happened in the opening chapter of Windswept House. Many people look forward to reading that book, thinking they can handle it, and then they pick up a copy, get to that first chapter, and they put it down and never pick it back up because it's horrifying. But she was ritually harmed by this priest, and McElroy was one of the men she alleges hid that priest away. That priest is no longer a priest canonically. He was laicized, but once a priest, always a priest, as they say. And here's what she posted Friday on X. CNN reports that Cardinal McElroy is, quote, especially mindful of those harmed by McCarrick. Yet McElroy protected the satanic person who forced himself upon her. McElroy has never said a single word to me. Not one word, folks. Don't buy the mindfulness BS. It's all gaslighting. And she shares the article here, and I'll just go right to that. Because this story is incredible. It's hard to believe that CNN would do what they're doing here. By the way, it's written by Christopher Lamb and somebody named Mitchell McCluskey. Christopher Lamb's a key figure. He is a Catholic. He's a journalist who at least used to write for The Tablet out of the UK. He's become CNN's go-to journalist for all things Catholicism. And the headline here is, Theodore McCarrick, former archbishop accused of really bad things, passes away at 94. This was their reporting, published on the same day that I did my live stream. They do something not terribly subtle here. Cardinal Robert McElroy was chosen by Francis for a number of things. One of those was to oppose Donald Trump. Not to bring politics into this, but it's one of the things he was clearly put in office to do, to stand up on the migration issue. The American cardinals and American bishops, the entire U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, it seems, has rallied around Cardinal Robert McElroy in this role. He is the go-to person to establish a counterbalance against Donald Trump and is leading the effort to get Catholics to not vote for Republican again. Again, they're very, sounds cynical. I'm sorry to report this to you, but that's the way they view things now, is everything for them is political. And so you get a very not terribly subtle elevation of Cardinal Robert McElroy, a man who has no credibility on this issue at all in this. It's subtle, though. From the article, quote, Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington, who was accused of doing bad things to minors and adults, has died, according to a statement by his successor, Cardinal Robert McElroy. Today, I learned of the death of Ted McCarrick, former Archbishop of Washington. At this moment, I am especially mindful of those he harmed during the course of his priestly ministry, McElroy of Washington said in a statement. Through their enduring pain, may we remain steadfast in our prayers for them and for all victims of those deeds. McCarrick was 94 years old, according to Vatican News. And it goes into many of the details about his career. You can read those for yourself. I went over those ad nauseum. It's not a terribly long report. The most interesting detail there is they went to Cardinal McElroy instead of, I don't know, one of the more conservative cardinals, one of the more conservative American bishops. They went to McElroy, the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., McCarrick's old see. And McElroy is the person, the face of the resistance in Washington. And that's why they did it, because it's CNN we're talking about here. And really, they're not the only ones who did this. So I kind of consider this one a secular outlet, because it's definitely not a Catholic outlet. It was Religion Digital. They report, this is on their reporting on Ted McCarrick. And here you will see they took the opportunity to defend Francis and his coterie of villains and how they handled this entire story. So from their article, quote, Vigano, Archbishop Vigano, wrote an open letter in 2018 accusing Pope Francis of removing sanctions on McCarrick placed by his predecessor, Benedict XVI, between 2009 and 2010. And that's true. Francis did those things. A Vatican report published in November 2020 found that Pope John Paul II tapped McCarrick to head the Diocese of Washington despite credible accusations against him. And Benedict XVI later asked the cardinal to discreetly retire from the public eye. The report also stated that Vigano failed to investigate the allegations at the time. Terence McKiernan, president of the watchdog group bishopaccountability.org, told RNS that with McCarrick's death, quote, as many, many victims breathe a sigh of relief, especially because even an elderly villain is still a danger. McKiernan said, it is good that we now acknowledge the damage he did, but there were so many missed opportunities to do that earlier, pointing out that a 2020 report on McCarrick's case substantially ignored the many children that McCarrick had done bad things to. He added, all of these missed opportunities are indications that the system still isn't equipped or willing to deal with this kind of evil. I think the story of McCarrick, in a way, is a story of continued resistance to the realities of the situation. The survivors network of those harmed by priests echoed McKiernan's statements. McCarrick was never held accountable for his crimes, the organization wrote in a statement, and instead, quote, was promoted, celebrated, and shielded by legions of bishops, cardinals, and even popes. Many of those same officials remain in positions of power today, unaccountable and unrepentant. And as an aside, McElroy is one of them. This is why this is amazing that they're elevating McElroy, who hid priests and who did things like McCarrick. Last month, that organization announced an advocacy effort called Conclave Watch to raise awareness around the records of this evil of several cardinals and to demand a universal zero tolerance law. This is the group that I reported on for you who are using the canonical process to file canonical lawsuits against several Bergoglian type cardinals. And the one who's going to handle those cases is the front runner, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. They're helping him out in a way. There's no reason to believe the next conclave won't include more McCarricks, influencing, protecting, and electing one of their own, just like he did at the last conclave, said Peter Isley, chair of the SNAP Global Advocacy Working Group. That's why the public must know who these candidates are. The shadow of McCarrick's evil has continued to hang over both the Washington and Newark dioceses, as Cardinals McElroy and Tobin have faced accusations that they mishandled matters relating to McCarrick. Tobin has recently faced blowback for promoting Monsignor Joseph Riley as president of Seton Hall University. Riley, who once served as priest secretary to McCarrick, has been accused of mishandling these kinds of allegations. In February, Tobin announced a third-party review of the 2019 investigation that implicated Riley. McElroy has been accused of ignoring warnings from whistleblower and researcher Richard Sipe about McCarrick's evil in 2016. Cardinal has said he took Sipe's warning seriously, but that Sipe behaved in an untrustworthy manner when approaching him with the accusations, refusing to provide corroborating evidence and delivering a letter through a process server who impersonated a donor. So there's your plausible deniability for Cardinal Robert McElroy. Again, he is going to be the highest profile cardinal in the Catholic Church in the United States, probably for the next 4 years, if not longer. And if Francis is around in 4 years, and if Trump is followed by J.D. Vance, McElroy will probably still remain in the See of Washington until someone like him can be found. Now, responses to all of this from some priests on social media have been interesting, to say the least. You get, I've got two here for you. The first is a priest calling himself Father V. He says, quote, I believe it was 1987 or 88 that I heard from Newark seminarians about McCarrick's proclivities. It was a very open topic of discussion, and those who could and should have done something chose to do nothing, to their everlasting shame. He's saying this in a repost of this, saying, I'm confident in saying that in the northeastern U.S. in the mid-late 80s, every bishop, every vicar general, every seminary rector, every vocations director, etc., knew about Uncle Ted's proclivities and the infamous beach house. Now, if you don't know what the reference to the beach house is, Ted McCarrick would host parties at the beach house. This is common public knowledge. This is not gossip. This is public common knowledge now. But he would host parties at a beach house. Now, why does a bishop of the church own a vacation home? That's just a question I have, right? That seems unbecoming for a bishop in general, but McCarrick had one. It was a beach house, and he would have seminarians and other priests come there, and they would, we'll say that they had Jesuit-style synodal encounters with each other there. And seminarians, and apparently, allegedly, sometimes, the pre-seminary high school students were their entertainment of choice at these places. It was an open secret. They all knew. And I have heard directly from priests far from the East Coast, talking priests on the West Coast who heard about this as well. Every single one of them knew about this. Or not every single one of them, but most of them knew. And I'm actually glad that seminarians knew about this in a way, because if the word got out among seminarians, then sure, there were some very cynical seminarians who should not have been in the seminary and should not have been made priests later, who took advantage of the situation, probably enjoyed themselves. But there were others who knew about this and decided to warn other seminarians about this. And so you should be glad that the seminarians had each other's back on this to protect each other. Now, that's not the only priest. Another one, a priest named Father Jaden A.M. Hagood, says, every morning I wake up and say, Lord, what do you want from me today? Today I am praying for all those who have been harmed by clergy and then treated as lunatics for shedding light on what has happened. McCarrick may be gone, but his legacy lives on in men like Supich, McElroy, Tobin, McGovern, and Lucas. Till these stories stop happening, I'm going to continue to be a thorn in the side of many. It's 100% unexcusable. There he is, reposting Rachel Mastrogiacomo. But the thing that's the most interesting about this is you saw a lot of stories over the weekend being posted on X and other places from laity and some priests about McCarrick, but there's also an odd amount of silence from those who are most vocally supporters of Francis. And that is the most telling thing of all, because the Vigano report, as I call it, because they blamed Vigano, they blamed John Paul II, they blamed Benedict the 16th, but they gave Francis a pass as some great liberator on this issue in that document. It was hard to read it without laughing at it 5 years ago when I covered it here. These people are the same who give Francis credit for taking care of the problem. But if you know anything about the history of that period, from 2013, the moment Francis stood out on that loggia, to 2019, when everything fell apart for Ted McCarrick, or 2018, when everything fell apart for Ted McCarrick, that intervening 5 years, Francis was shielding him, just like he did Zanchetta, a bishop from Argentina, who he gave shelter to during his legal proceedings. So he did countless others. And there will be no justice for them on this. Now, speaking of Francis, he actually made a public appearance this weekend. We go to the EN, the English news service at Gloria TV for this headline. Vatican journalist, Pope Francis can hardly talk. He made a public appearance, and it surprised a lot of people. But he says the first appearance after his illness was alarming. Vatican journalist Marco Politi told the Augsburger Allgemeine newspaper. Politi, the journalist, watched with concern Pope Francis's first appearance after several weeks of suffering in the Gemelli Hospital. For those who know the Pope, it was shocking how difficult it was for him to move, how he struggled to breathe. What he said came out of his mouth in pieces. That's anybody familiar with respiratory infections among senior citizens, you will understand that that's not that surprising. This hot on the heels of it being reported that Francis tried to appear on video, but Francis appeared at the hospital. Yeah, or not at the hospital. He appeared in public and met briefly with people. It was surprising. And it was very clearly him. So those entertaining alternative hypotheses that he's been sort of replaced, he has not been. He's just hanging on. But he attempted to appear on video the day before, and it was canceled. And he was going to try to appear on video at the Angelus address, but it could not happen because of his health. So again, don't be surprised by any of these things, that Francis is not having the best experience of all these things at this time, all while the McCarrick stuff is happening. And it's taking all the attention away from Francis's health. It's also taking the attention away from a couple of other stories that deserve your attention. So brace yourself for this incredible story. You may have seen this post because it's been out there for a few days now. But we go here, find my tabs, to a post on X that just sort of from complicit clergy. Got to be careful when you talk about this one. If you ever watch like Michael Knowles video, or especially usually it's Michael Knowles, start talking about this subject broadly and immediately they cut away, right? Because our hosts have zero tolerance for replacing for disagreeing with the false gospel of this subject. But Cardinal Fernandez now claims that carving up those who deny immutable reality of the flesh is okay now in severe cases of this. Now, don't need to go into the details of this article. There's no reason to. It's Cardinal Fernandez being the slippery serpent that he always is. The thing to remember when you're talking about this, essentially what's being described as a social contagion, is now that society is basically turned against it, at least in America, the advocates for this, who many of them, if you get them talking about this subject, will say that they are openly against the Christian worldview, the Christian view of creation. And they would like to see it swept away. Many of them will tell you that every case is an extreme case. So here is Cardinal Fernandez in his official capacity as the prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, the old holy office, the Holy Inquisition, or more recently called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. He holds the same office that Cardinal Ratzinger held in the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s, defending the doctrine of the faith before he became Pope Benedict XVI. Cardinal Fernandez, holding that same office, says it's okay to subject people, including the most young, to those procedures in extreme cases. And the advocates for it, who want to upend civilization, sweep all mention of Christ from the public realm and get rid of the logical basis of Christian teaching on creation and the order of creation, including on humanity, will tell you that every case is an extreme case. That's what they will tell you. I know these people very well. I spent a lot of time with them before this became a very widely spread, well-known issue in the public sphere. I spent a lot of time with them working when I was in grad school. I knew these people very well. They will take this as an opportunity to say the Catholic Church agrees with us. Because every case is an extreme case. Every case. This is Amoris Laetitia in action. This is Fiducia Supplicans in action. Remember, Fiducia Supplicans actually explicitly said you can the couples in these parody of the James Martin parody of the Sacrament of Holy Matrimony, that the people in the relationship and the relationship could be blessed. Not affirmed by the church, but they could be given a blessing to mutually enrich themselves and grow closer to God. It's the same thing, except he's just verbally saying it here. Beware of when a formal document from Rome comes. Do not be shocked if we get a document like that from Rome. And you're going to see all of us trying to report on it on this platform without losing our channels, because YouTube takes a zero tolerance approach to disagreeing with this. Mary Beth says Cardinal Fernandez looks demonic. I will tell you that's the least flattering picture of him out there that I've seen. And that picture is always used by outlets that tell the truth about him to use to kind of push you in the direction of thinking he looks evil. Most of the pictures of him out there, you'll see he looks like anybody else. But that is a particularly nasty looking picture of him. It is sort of a form of manipulation. Now, speaking of manipulation, you will see this story also got lost in recent news from the English news service at Glory TV under the headline, Fatima, Enforced Synodality in Action. The Diocese of Fatima, they're implementing the synodal process, and priests who objected were silenced. You are going to see in your dioceses, in your parishes, unless you go to Mass at the SSPX, maybe the FSSP and groups like them, but definitely with the SSPX, unless you go there, you're going to see in your parish, directed by the bishop, synodal reforms. The elevation of the laity, decentralization of authority, laity taking greater roles in their parishes and things, which on paper sounds fine until you realize, again, this is the worst catechized generation in history, and you're about to see what I mean by that. But here is the details from this. This is at Fatima, okay, the Diocese of Fatima. Quote, Jose Ornelas Carvalho, Bishop of Lyra of Fatima, has decided to impose synodality on his clergy, writes Info Vaticana. He has carried out his work in 3 phases: endless meetings with much chatter, the transformation of the 73 parishes into 17 pastoral units and 7 vicariates, and the creation of presbyterial teams. Father Rui Marto, a Claretian and parish priest at Fatima, initially agreed to the radical measures, but then backed out and refused to be replaced. In the end, in accordance with the true meaning of synodality, he was removed. Father Marto lodged a canonical complaint, but as was to be expected, it was ignored. On the 30th of March, during a Novus Ordo Eucharist in the main church of Fatima, the pastoral unit of Fatima was imposed. The faithful were asked to accept the changes with unity, fidelity, and trust in the Holy Spirit. Parish model under the new synodal religion will be destroyed. You will have parish buildings, but you're likely to have priests traveling from great distances to cover masses at 5 parishes on a Sunday. That's likely what's going to happen. And what you're going to have is the model being tested in Germany, where you will have laity who are authorized, sometimes religious who are authorized, to offer the Eucharist instead, pre-consecrated hosts. Because instead of fixing what it is the modernists have wrought on the church, which is a collapse in vocations and a collapse in belief, they just turn it into a managerial problem. And that's what they're doing. And remember what I said, that this is the worst catechized generation in human history. New data shows you that most Catholics, at least in the United States, aren't even Christians. Headline from stream.org. U.S. Catholic belief in Holy Trinity hits bottom. Bombshell report laments rejection of Trinitarian doctrine by most American Christians. When they say most, they're not kidding. According to their data, 9 out of 10 Catholics in the United States aren't even Christian. Because if you do not believe in the Holy Trinity, and I'm not saying the hardest thing to understand in the faith that most people encounter, the doctrines of the Trinity, like almost nobody can explain it without accidentally slipping into heresy. Most people can't. Like good theologians can, but the typical Catholic has a very hard time with it. It's one of the trickiest things out in the faith to teach. I don't mean that. I mean, you deny the basic part of the Trinity, you're not even a Christian. You've left the faith. You've joined some ancient version of some heresy that's repackaged for modern day. Here are the details from this. Quote, only 9% of American Catholics believe in the existence and influence of the Holy Trinity, according to a shocking new report released by the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University last week. The alarming statistics published by eminent cultural analyst Dr. George Barna also highlights a significant departure from foundational Christian beliefs by mainline Protestants, those who theologically identify as born-again Christians and others who self-identify as Christians. According to Barna's findings, 20% of Protestants, 24% of born-again Christians, and 16% of self-identified Christians adopt the fundamental tenet of Christianity, quote, that God exists in 3 unique, equal, and indivisible persons. While only 1 out of every 10 American adults espouses a Trinitarian faith, the highest number of Christians, 62%, who uphold the doctrine of the Trinity are, quote, integrated disciples, a term Barna uses to designate Christians, quote, who possess a biblical worldview or a biblical theism. Statistically integrated disciples have a demonstrated ability to assimilate their beliefs into their lifestyle. Therefore, this group consistently, albeit imperfectly, comes closest to reflecting biblical principles into their opinions, beliefs, behaviors, and preferences. Not surprisingly, 2/3 of adults who possess a biblical worldview believe in the Trinity, he said. What is surprising is that they are the only population segment identified for which more than 40% believe in the existence and influence of all 3 persons of the Trinity. But even the statistics for the groups that are most in tune with biblical teachings, such as belief in the nature and impact of the Trinity, are shockingly low for a nation in which most people claim to be Christian, he acknowledged. Quoting his study, confusion regarding the Trinity persists today, although an overwhelming majority of Christian churches, including almost all Protestant, Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox communities of faith, embrace the Trinity as a mainstream doctrinal foundation. The survey revealed that 1 out of 4 people who attend an evangelical church or Pentecostal church are Trinitarian. Slightly fewer mainline Protestants, 20%, espouse belief in the Trinity, but less than half as many Catholics, 9%, are Trinitarians. End quote. 9% of Catholics are Trinitarians. This isn't surprising. Most of the data from other research organizations shows that they talk about Catholics who believe in the things the church teaches on morality, and they break it down into different categories of Catholics based on how often they attend Mass, and they define someone who attends Mass regularly as someone who attends Mass twice a month. You need to be going to Mass every single Sunday and every holy day of obligation, unless you have a very good reason. Otherwise, you need to be there. Okay? But the less often you attend Mass, the less you believe. Makes sense if you think about it for half a second. That's what we're dealing with. And then there was other data. They did an organization did something called geofencing. What they do is they track cell phone data. And even if your phone is off, your phone can be tracked, by the way. You should know that. Even if your phone is off, if you have this thing off, it can still be tracked. And they found that only 8% of Catholics go to Mass every Sunday using cell phone tracking data. You may leave your phone in your car. That's fine. Still considered at the location. Most people don't leave their home completely without the thing. And with that data, 8%. And that lines up perfectly with the Trinitarian data. Make of that what you will. This is all against the backdrop of people who are barely Catholic at all, barely Christian at all, in high positions in the hierarchy. They're the ones, celebrity media are turning into celebrity bishops to align Catholics, put Catholics in quotes at this point, and Christians more broadly, back in line with the fading power of the outgoing establishment political system in the United States. We're in a political upheaval at this point. It's pretty obvious. These things happen about once a century, where the whole system gets shaken to its core and new things aligned in it. We're probably going through one of those right now. This is the thrashing of that system. That's why, as I reported to you earlier, they elevated McElroy, someone who has no business being in the priesthood at all. He's also the smartest of the American Cardinals, almost certainly. But I'm curious what you think about this. Does this surprise you? You get Cardinal Fernandez saying, oh, extreme circumstances, we can allow this evil process to be done to those who are confused about the fundamental, immutable nature of reality at the most basic level. Knowing full well that the activists for this will say, well, every situation is an extreme one. And that this synodal reform at Fatima is being, and coming to a parish near you, is involving the same laity who only less than 1 in 10 of them believe in the Trinity. I'm curious what you think about this. So let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you have not. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. If you've ever thought about supporting the work we do here at Return to Tradition, it does help enormously. There are options in the description box below, or that join button that's on your screen. All those options were asked for by viewers like you. Helps keep these daily messages coming. And as always, pray for the church. All these bishops we talked about here today, whether it's Fernandez, McElroy, those researchers, anybody, I'm not trying to make you sinfully angry at them. Pray for their souls while they still have a chance. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.